In this video, we're going to talk about two-step equations. Before we get to the two-step equations, let's quickly review the one-step equations. So in one-step equations, there are equations that take one step to solve. And solving, when we say solve, we mean find the value for the variable. So in the first example, remember our process was to separate the equation onto two sides. We're going to find the variable, review that our goal is to get the x by itself. So we want x equals everything over here. So in order to move the plus 5, we do the opposite to both sides. So we subtract 5 from both sides, and this leaves us with x is equal to 8 minus 5, or 3. Remember to check. So when we check, we're going to replace the variable with parentheses and plug in the number that we found. And we can see that 3 plus 5 is equal to 8. We get 8 equals 8, which tells me that this is my correct answer. Next example, same thing. We break the problem into two parts at the equal sign. I find my variable, that's the r, and I'm going to move everything else. Remember, my goal is to get r equals something over here. So in order to move that -7, I'm going to do the opposite, which is a plus 7. This leaves me with just the r, because -7 plus 7 is 0. I just have that r left. And I do a -3 plus 7. Now, remember our integer addition and subtraction. This is a battle. They're going against each other. The winner is positive. And since it's a battle, we subtract. So we get r is equal to 4. So we check it, replace the variable with parentheses, copy everything else, and dump the value in that you found. 4 minus 7, again, that makes it a battle. We end up with -3 equals -3, which tells me for sure that r is equal to 4. Next example, we break it apart. Again, we're looking for x equals something. I identify what's happening to the x is multiply. So the opposite of multiply by 2 is divide by 2. And we're going to show that by the fraction bar. Remember that fractions are just division. These cancel. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So that leaves us with an x equals negative divided by a positive will give me a negative. And 12 divided by 2 is 6. Plugging it back in, 2, and then the parentheses equals -12. I dump in the value that I found. Positive times negative gives me a negative, and 2 times 6 is 12. So we get -12 equals -12, which is true, which tells me that my solution is x equals -6. Last review problem here, we break it into two parts. I identify that variable. I know that I'm looking for n equals something. So what's happening to the n is this is n divided by 8. The opposite of divided by 8 is multiply by 8. So I'm going to perform the opposite, which is multiply by 8. This cancels my denominator, leaving me with n is equal to 6 times 8, or 48. I do my checking step, replacing the variable with parentheses. Everything else gets copied. I'm going to dump that 48 in there. And what I see is 48 divided by 8, which is 6. So that tells me everything's good. My solution is n is equal to 48. Now, If you need more of a review on this, go back and look at the one-step equation videos. But we're going to go on and talk about two-step equations. So our process for two-step equations is very similar to the one-step equation. Obviously, we're adding another step to make it two steps. It's easier to explain looking at an example. So we're going to start with the example 2x plus 1 equals 11. So we still separate our sides. This helps us make sure that we're doing our operations on both sides of the equation. We have to make sure that we keep the equal sign. And in order to keep both the sides equal, we have to apply the operations to both sides. So we separate the sides at the equal sign, we identify the variable. So by identifying the variable, I see that the 2 is really close, the 1 is far away. And we're going to move everything that's not touching the x first. Remember, my goal is to get x equals something. So we've got to get everything away. So we do the plus minus first because it's not touching the x. The opposite of a plus 1 is a minus 1. Now the 1's cancel here. Positive 1 and negative 1 is 0. That leaves us with 2x equals 10. And this is a one-step equation, so what we just reviewed. And you can see from this last step, we want to move everything that's touching. If it's touching, it means multiply. So what we do is the opposite of multiply by 2, which is divide by 2. And this leaves us with x is equal to 10 divided by 2, which is 5. Now, checking is important, especially when this is new to us. So we're going to replace the variable with parentheses and dump the value in. Then 2 times 5 is 10. Next step is 10 plus 1. That gives me 11. Now, 11 equals 11 is true, which tells me that x is equal to 5 is my solution. Example 2, we have 4x minus 3 is equal to 9. So again, we separate the sides at the equal sign. We find my variable, understanding that my goal is to get the x by itself. So we want x alone on this side of my equation. So I'm going to move everything that's not touching. The negative 3 doesn't touch the x now, so we're going to do the opposite, which is a plus 3. This leaves us with 4x equals 12. And now it's a one-step equation. So we follow that process. We're going to move everything that's touching now, which is the 4. This is 4 times x. The opposite of a times 4 is a divide by 4. Again, we show that with a fraction. And we're left with x is equal to 3. Checking this one, we replace the variable with parentheses and copy the rest of the problem. We plug in that value that we found for x. This gives me 12 minus 3 equals 9. And 12 minus 3 is 9. So we get 9 is equal to 9, which means that checking, that's true. And my solution is x is equal to 3. Next example. 5 minus x equals 7. So again, we separate my problem. Now understand that if there's no number in front of the x, it's just like having a multiplier of 1. So in this case, it's actually negative 1. My variable is my x. My goal is to get the x by itself. So I'm going to move the 5 first because it's not touching. Now the sign goes in front of it. So if there's no sign, it means that it's not negative. This is a positive 5. So I apply the opposite of positive 5, which is negative 5. This leaves me with a negative x equals 7 minus 5 is 2. Now remember, I have that 1 in front here. And when we get to this step, we're going to move everything that's touching. And we do that by dividing. So we divide both sides by a negative 1. This leaves me with x equals 2 divided by negative 1, which just changes the sign of the 2. Now, here's where you see why we use parentheses. It's very easy to get confused when your solution is negative and you've got a minus in front of it. So this just helps you keep it clear that what you're trying to do is a minus negative. And we know that in order to do this, we keep change. And we end up with, oops, sorry, that should be a 7. Oh my goodness. So 5 plus 2 is 7 equals 7. So my check step is true. And that means that my solution is x equals negative 2. I think we've got one more example out here. Oh, 2 more examples. So if you notice here, we've got a fraction. So this is going to be slightly different in our process. We're still going to separate the sides. We still know that we want to get the x by itself. But we need to move the stuff that's farthest away from the variable first. So the plus 3 is here on the same level. The 7 is farther away. So this is x plus 3 divided by 7. So it's the divided by 7 that we're going to move first. Now we move divide by 7 by performing the opposite, which is multiply by 7. So 7 times this fraction with the denominator of 7. When we multiply a fraction by its denominator, the fraction goes away. This leaves us with x plus 3 is equal to 4 times 7, which is 28. And now we've got a one-step equation. X plus 3, the opposite of plus 3 is minus 3, which leaves us with x is equal to 25. I'm going to replace the variable with parentheses. Plug in the value that I found for x. This gives me 25 plus 3, which is 28, over 7 equals 4. So I'm going horizontally now. 28 divided by 7 is 4. So we get a 4 equals 4, which tells me that's correct. And my solution is x is equal to 25. Last example here. So again, we separate our sides. We find the variable. We're going to move everything that doesn't touch the x first. So that's this positive 8. I apply the opposite of positive 8, which is negative 8. This gives me a negative 5 times x equals 35. Now a one-step equation, negative 5 times x, the opposite of times negative 5 is divided by negative 5. This leaves me with the x equals 35 divided by negative 5 is negative 7. Plugging my values in. Remembering PEMDAS, I'm going to do the multiply part first. So we've got 8 minus, then we've got 5 times negative 7. which is negative 35. Make sure you copy the rest of the problem. Then we do our keep, change, change. And 8 plus 35 is 43. Because that's true, I know that my solution is x is equal to negative 7. I think that's the examples that we've got. Next time we will be looking at how to solve equations with fractions.